We're back here at the line. In mid-November, former state Senator Phil Griego was convicted of several charges from the time he held public office. When he is sentenced in mid-February, he faces fines and up to 17 and a half years in prison. Attorney General Hector Balderas is asking a district judge for an enhanced sentence that would also strip Mr. Griego of his legislative pension, which is more than $1,300 a month, Tom Garrity. And this has really kind of kicked up something. There's an interesting editorial in the Journal about this. We're paying a ton of money to convicted felons who are former state legislators who have their pensions still intact. So the fundamental first question is, should we not be paying these folks anything after they have a conviction?
Or at least reallocate it to the state correctional system. They're going to be serving time in some form or fashion. Why not have some of their contributions, or their entitlement used to help to pay for their correctional time?
That's a thought. Interesting. Yeah. What do you make of that? That's an interesting thought. Kind of clean and,
Laura is going to say Tom is absolutely right on this.
No, I disagree. I mean, I think the pension is something that is relevant to, it's connected to their time in service.
Okay.
In the case of Phil Griego, there's obviously been a trial, there was a conviction, but that was a specific time period, a specific vote. There was also many years of public service. And that's what they sign up with, not getting paid a salary. That's sort of what they get in old age. And, to me, removing someone's pension, like if they didn't do it to OJ, they didn't take away his NFL pension and he's been in jail,
he's
for the
not
past.
an elected official who was found guilty of abusing his power and position.
Nevertheless, I still think these people have served for a long time and there's a pension.
So there's a line there between their previous service and perhaps when these acts took place. And everything after that, perhaps?
Well, I think that there's a time period that was specific to whatever act occurred. Okay. And I don't know specifically what the time frame was for Phil Griego, but I know it was related to a particular vote and a transaction.
Right.
There were many years in which he served and did a lot of good work for the state, as did some of the others that have been convicted, as have, Blagojevich and other people in other states.
Right.
I think that their time having spent that is, what they receive in almost a contractual nature is that pension.
Okay.
So to remove it completely, I don't think it's correct. I think it's interesting, this idea of reallocating it, because there is a shortage, obviously, of funding for the correctional facilities in general, but I think removing it altogether is not the answer.
Good point there. Diana Duran, she's getting somewhere near 58,000 a year in pension, even though she had her troubles and her conviction as well. And I can see how some people just find this galling. 58 grand will carry you a long way into Mexico. You know what I mean? Just all of that money gone,
I think Laura brings up an interesting point. Specifically, I was going to bring up with Diana Duran is that a lot of her money comes from just being a state employee, not an elected official.
She was a state clerk, a city clerk rather.
She was putting into her pension as a state employee before she was even elected, and then even before she was, kind of found guilty of some of these things. But I do think that it's a hard sell to the public to say this person, just let's say somebody messed around with state money. It's hard to sell that to citizens and say they also get to keep your tax dollars as an elected pension. But there is that gray area of before they actually did whatever they were accused of doing or before they were even elected.
Right, good point there. The taxpayer kicks in $43 for every dollar that the elected person kicks into the pension fund. Should the taxpayer have a say in this? That's their money,
Well, and I think to some extent the taxpayers have already had a say in this.
Yeah.
The reason that the state passed a law in 2012 saying that we could assess legislators their fringe benefits. We could take them back if they got in trouble.
Right.
That law passed because of the whole thing that happened with Manny Aragon, who served time. It was a federal prison, but he served 4 years in prison. I think the scale of what happened with him is very different, and that you two sort of brought that up in some way. But Phil Griego's sort of gain from the crimes he's been convicted of was $50,000 of real estate commission,
right.
Whereas Manny Aragon was assessed with $1.2 million to pay back in restitution, but something like $4 million went missing from that project.
Right.
So I think that the law passed after something really egregious took place, and that then apparently, Hector Balderas is saying the law is really not strong enough to just revoke Phil Griego's pension. And so that's why he has to ask the judge for this enhancement. When you look at a 69-year-old man who's facing 17 years in jail, I'm not sure how much more enhanced we need to get there.
Okay.
Although I also feel like it is troubling when someone is convicted of a crime related to their public service, and yet they're still being paid, for their public service. That is just
And also getting
hard
cost
to
of
sit
living
with.
raises like everybody else who's still working in the legislature who didn't break the law. Tom, again, it's on a par with everybody else. Should there be a difference there?
I believe that if you abuse your power and position in office, that there's a separate set of rules.
Okay.
I respect what Laura had said as far as Senator Griego has done a lot of great things for the state. But when it came down to his final act, it really did not bode well because he was found guilty by a jury of his peers. Unfortunately, the way that works is that he abused that position, and as a result, I think you don't get to keep that money, or at least it needs to be reallocated. And the scale is different, as Julianne mentioned, with respect to Manny Aragon and even Diana Duran and even our state treasurers.
Sure.
I think the
Mr. Montoya is
outrage here-
getting $4,000 a month. I mean, you go down the list. Mr. Vigilo's getting about $4,500 a month. It's
it's like it really is, and it's really sad when you think about this. A type of a culture of corruption. I mean, there are excellent legislators, there are excellent public servants who are all brought down as a result of actions of a few. So I think the actions of the few, they need to be made an example of to say, this is just not accepted by our statewide elected officials.
Is there, we've got about 30 seconds here. Does it serve as a deterrent to bad behavior if you know you're going to lose your pension? I mean, folks have the right to rebuild their lives, including their financial lives, but should that happen on the backs of the taxpayers?
Well, certainly, I mean, if it were something that were crafted, appropriately, it could be a deterrent. I think it definitely could be. I think people might think twice if they thought that they were going to lose their pension. But again, you look at Diana Duran, for example, she worked as the county clerk in Otero County for a long time, and then she was a state senator for a long time. I think one of the problems is we have a system here in New Mexico where legislators aren't getting paid. She was paid as a county clerk.
That's right.
County clerks are paid, but the legislators aren't paid at all. And so you end up, their only thing that they're getting in terms of compensation is that pension. They're paying into that pension. And so when you hear the numbers about $43 for every dollar, well, they're not making any money, though, at that job. So maybe if they were actually getting paid and they had to contribute, then the math would be very different.
Glad you got that in. That's an interesting point there.
When we did a story the night of the Phil Griego verdict, I interviewed Representative Jim Trujillo, who was tied up in that case because he carried the bill that sold the building. But he said something very similar to what Laura has been saying, that the service that Phil Griego did should not be ignored, and that if legislators were paid, he said something like they wouldn't have to even think about doing something like this. That was a controversial statement. But
Right. But there it is. A lot of folks would agree with him, that's for sure. Thank you all. Good stuff on a Friday night.